Hi guys, welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to share with you my second favorite case, which is the Oba Chandler case. And it's my favorite case because of how it was solved, not because of what happened. Just like the John List murders, it's just like the forensics involved in this case is just so good. I'm so excited to share this case with you. I haven't seen that many videos about this. I'm surprised it's not more popular on YouTube, but I'm here to talk about it. And this is the story of how a mother and her two daughters went on their first vacation ever from Ohio to Florida and never made it back. So if you want to find out more about this case, please stay tuned and let's get started. On June 4th, 1989, in Tampa, Florida, authorities discovered 3 bodies who had been tied up and attached to bricks. Their mouths had been taped shut and they were naked from the waist down, suggesting a sexual motive. Now, the first thing to do was to identify these bodies. Obviously, they had no ID on them and they were found in the middle of the water. So it was just such an odd location. Authorities couldn't figure out where they had come from. Each victim had been tied to a 30-pound concrete block, which means that they could have very easily never been found. The only reason they floated to the surface was because of the decomposition gases and the bloating outweighed the block of concrete that was weighing them down. They estimated that the bodies had been in water for about 3 days. The investigators also contacted the University of South Florida to analyze the currents over the past 3 days to try and determine where the bodies had been left. They concluded that they couldn't have been thrown off a bridge or from a shoreline because the way the bodies were found, they had to have been pushed by current. So they assumed that the bodies had been dumped in the middle of the Bay Area. But still, they couldn't figure out where the bodies had been dumped to begin with. Once the story made it to the news, they were hoping that someone would be able to help them identify the 3 victims. And a hotel manager did contact the police, stating that a mother and her 2 daughters had checked in 3 days prior. None of the belongings in the room had been touched. So they had checked in and they had brought their luggage into the bedroom, but none of the towels had been touched. It just looked like they had just checked in, dropped off their luggage, left, and never came back. The room belonged to Joan Rogers, 36, and her 2 daughters, Michelle, 17, and Christy, 14. While they were going through the bedroom to look at the personal belongings, they did find a camera, and the last picture on that camera was a view from the balcony that showed the sun was about to set. So it was a picture they took from the balcony, and you could see the sun just about to set in the background. And that picture had to be taken the day that they checked into the hotel and never made it back because the camera was left behind. Witnesses did confirm that the 3 women had been seen at 7:30 that night at the hotel restaurant. That was the last time anyone had seen them alive. What's interesting is that Joan's car was found only a mile away at a public boat launch. So what happened? Where had they gone? How could they possibly leave the hotel or the hotel restaurant, drive for a mile, and then be found 3 days later dead? They immediately contacted Hal Rogers, who was the husband or the father, who was running a dairy farm back in Ohio. He was too busy to go on holiday with them, so for the very first time he had let his wife and the daughters go on a little road trip to Florida. It was quickly confirmed through dental records that the 3 victims were Joan, Christy, and Michelle Rogers, Hal's wife and daughters. And the worst part being that the autopsy confirmed that all 3 had water in their lungs, meaning that they had been thrown into the water while still alive. And this no longer makes this case a murder investigation, but an execution. Now, what bothered investigators and police was that Hal Rogers didn't seem to show much emotion. He seemed very cold during the interrogation process because obviously they asked him questions first. He's the spouse, and even though the distance from Ohio to Florida, it's a bit far to commit a murder of that nature, they still needed to ask him questions to see what was going on. And they just could not move past the fact that Hal just showed very little emotion at the whole news of his wife and daughters. And he very simply explained that he had a farm to run. He didn't have time to grieve or be emotional. I mean, dairy farms, especially back in the 90s, I'm sure it's still a difficult job now, but he didn't even have time to go on a holiday with them. And like, I don't think it's fair to judge people's grieving process. I witness people going through grief every day as part of my job, and it really ranges from being absolutely devastated and really showing it, crying, sobbing, to making jokes or just being very cold. And I would never judge anyone for reacting that way, because nobody knows how they're going to react until they experience it themselves, and everybody's different. And to be honest, he just found out that his wife and daughters had been possibly sexually assaulted and then thrown into the water to die. That's not something I could process in any amount of time. I mean, I really don't blame him for acting numb or acting cold and just maybe coping by just focusing on work and keep working. And he did say later on that he did what he had to do to just keep going. The problem was that he didn't report the women missing until 3 days after their return date. But bear in mind, this is 1989. They didn't have cell phones. It was an actual road trip, and he's busy running a farm. He's not, I mean, maybe if they had taken a flight, or maybe if they had a flight and he was meant to pick them up, or someone was meant to pick them up, that would imply a more serious deadline for their return. But he very easily could have guessed, you know what, they probably wanted a couple extra days, or maybe they got delayed, they didn't want to drive as much. It really, that's, I mean, in 2018, 2021, any year later than 1989, I think it would be a bit odd to not report someone missing immediately, because we have so many ways of communicating with each other. But 1989, I don't know, it's just, I don't blame him for not reporting them missing right away. He was probably distracted. He was probably working really hard. And it was 1989. Like, they were just on a holiday. So he was not worried, and he had no reason to be concerned. Now, police actually believe that Hal's brother John could have been involved in this, because police did find out that John had sexually assaulted Michelle, the eldest daughter, not long ago. And they believe that he could have been involved with murdering the whole family, potentially as revenge, but police quickly ruled him out. He was in jail at the time of the murders, and you guessed it, he was in jail for raping a woman. So it couldn't have been him, and police quickly ruled out the fact that he would have hired like a hitman or something like that. There's no way he could have known exactly when the girls would have been in Florida. And what's so sad is that from the gossip in town, it's alleged that the mom and the daughters had left on this holiday to go to Florida to distance themselves from the incident, from the trauma. Now, because of John's assault, police did actually believe that Hal could have also been involved, only because he bailed his brother out of jail. Like, Hal knew what John had done to his eldest daughter and still posted bail for him. And although, like, I feel awful for him losing his wife and daughters, I can't imagine ever going through trauma like that and recovering from that and moving on from that. But at the same time, the fact that he posted bail for his brother who assaulted his daughter is honestly absolutely inexcusable. Like, you need to be better. That's not okay. So police thought that maybe Hal had something to do with this because he was defending his brother by posting his bail, but they quickly realized that Hal didn't have time to do anything. He was working on that dairy farm. He luckily liked to eat all of his meals at local restaurants, so he had multiple witnesses putting him there during the time of the murders, and there was no way he could have made it to Florida from Ohio in that time frame. So it's not illegal to post bail for your sex offender brother, but yeah. So once they had ruled out Hal and the brother who was in jail at the time of the murders anyway, they started processing the evidence, but because the bodies had been in water for 3 days, most essential evidence had been washed away. Investigators assumed that there was a sexual motive and the victims had been sexually assaulted, but there was no way of verifying this. So the next thing police checked was the car. Maybe there was a clue inside the car that had been left at the public boat launch that could indicate where the victims were headed. Investigators found 2 handwritten notes in the car, one of them on a pamphlet providing directions to the hotel, and then another note on the hotel stationery providing directions to the boat launch. A forensic document examiner confirmed that the handwriting for the directions to the boat launch were written by Joan Rogers. However, the directions on the pamphlet to the hotel on the pamphlet were not written by Joan or any of the daughters. To me, the handwriting looked fairly average, but the forensic examiner noticed a few anomalies with this handwriting that she had never really seen before. She noticed that the T in the middle of the word Courtney had been capitalized right after a lowercase r, which was highly unusual. And she also noted that the way the letters Y were written all varied. The letter Y appeared 4 times in that sentence on the pamphlet, and every single time they were written differently, as she had never really seen that letter written that way ever before. And at this stage, the handwriting on that pamphlet is the only clue they have that could potentially give them more information about what happened. Was this a complete stranger's handwriting? Maybe they had lost their way and found someone along the way to give them directions, or could this be the murderers? The biggest piece of information on these handwritten notes was the fact that Joan had written the directions to the boat launch and then had also written blue with white, which could refer to a boat color, and it could imply a meeting time or a meeting place. Now, it's Florida. If you're looking to identify a boat that has blue and white colors, it could take you the rest of your life because so many boats were on that public boat launch. But it did give investigators something to work with. And a lead did come through regarding a blue and white boat. 2 weeks prior to the murders, a Canadian woman had reported being assaulted on a boat trip. Judy Blair and Barbara Motram were 2 Canadian tourists who were just in Florida for a nice holiday, and they were approached by a man who described himself as an aluminum siding businessman, which is a very important detail for later on, and he had offered them a sunset boat ride. Judy accepted and Barbara refused, so Barbara just waited for her in the hotel room while Judy went on this sunset boat trip. Unfortunately, once they were in the middle of the water, he threatened her at knife point and told her to get undressed. He told her he would kill her if she didn't have sex with him, and also warned her that there were sharks in the water in case she ever considered jumping off the boat. Now, when I first heard that story, my first instinct was to say I choose the sharks, but honestly, who's to say how you would react in a situation like that, especially if you're being held at knife point. And I feel like if you do jump off the boat, he could easily run you over with that boat. So it's just like such a horrendous situation to be in. And he also told her it's not worth getting murdered over rape, implying that he knew exactly that what he was doing was rape. But he didn't kill her. He actually waited until it was completely dark. And then once he drove the boat back to shore, he just let her go. And police were convinced that this man had something to do with the Rogers family murders. Unfortunately, when Judy Blair reported the crime to the police, she had already showered, so there was no DNA to be retrieved. However, they did establish a composite sketch with her, and that was released to the media. Hundreds of leads came through after that composite sketch was released to the media, but all of them were eliminated. After 3 years without any leads in this case, police decided to use 5 billboards in the area to show the sample of handwriting that could lead to more clues or directly to the killer. Now, this brings me to my absolute favorite part. I don't know about you, the handwriting itself to me really doesn't stand out. It looks fairly average to me. I think if you were to get the handwriting of like my colleagues or family members, there's only like a handful of them I could recognize, but most of them just seem so average. But this is where Joanne Steffi comes into play. Joanne Steffi is just an ordinary gal stuck in traffic, coming home from work one day when she spots the billboard with a sample of the handwriting on it. And she says, "That's Oba Chandler's handwriting. This is the man I hired as a contractor." And of course, he wasn't just any type of contractor. He was in the aluminum siding business. Joanne described Oba as a very shifty character who just gave off really bad vibes. She didn't think like She didn't feel like this was the type of person she could trust, and she had actually kept the original handwritten receipt that he had given her for the work he did. She handed it in to police immediately, and when the forensic document examiner made the comparison, she confirmed that this was indeed the same handwriting that was found on the pamphlet. Now, let's talk about Oba Chandler. At the time of the murders, he was a business owner who worked in aluminum siding. He also had 8 children with 7 different women. But let's go back in time a little bit to dive into his childhood. Oba Chandler was born on October 11th, 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the 4th out of 5 children, and when he was only 10 years old, his father, Oba Chandler Sr., hanged himself in the apartment's basement. And his father's death absolutely destroyed Oba, and it kickstarted a lifetime of crime. He started stealing cars when he was only a teenager, and by the time he was an adult, he had been arrested for burglary, kidnapping, and armed robbery. There were also reports of him being a peeping Tom and also of robbing a couple in their own home in the middle of the night at gunpoint. When police interrogated Oba, he did confirm that he had bumped into the Rogers women because they were lost and looking for directions. So he did confirm that he spoke to them, gave them directions to their hotel, and then never saw them again. The only time he claims to have seen them were on the billboards and also in the newspaper headlines. Now, he did confirm that he had been on his boat that night and that he had actually been stranded for hours because his boat had a gas line leak and the engine wouldn't start. He claims to have contacted Coast Guard and the Marine Patrol for help, but they couldn't help him, so he decided to just fix the leak himself with duct tape and just make his way home. Now, the ship-to-shore records did place Oba on his boat in the middle of the water on the night of the rape of Judy Blair and also on the night of the murders. And although he denied any involvement with the Rogers family murders, police brought in Judy Blair to hopefully identify the person who had raped her. They gave her like one of those sheets where they put pictures of similar looking men on a piece of paper, and she pointed out Oba Chandler, but she wanted to see him in person in a lineup to be absolutely sure. They put him in a lineup upon her request, and she confirmed that he had been the man who assaulted her that night. Police decided to have a look at Oba Chandler's boat to try and find out if they could find any forensic evidence of his involvement with the rape or the murders. But when they started looking for his boat, they quickly found out that he had sold it. He sold his boat. How bad does that look? Like, why? Why did you sell your boat? I wonder why. And the problem is, even though Judy Blair testified that this was the man who had raped her, that does not mean he murdered the Rogers family. And police really did need more solid proof that their paths had crossed versus Oba saying that he did give them instructions or his handwriting matching the one on the pamphlet. It wasn't enough. They needed solid evidence that he had bumped into the Rogers women. And they managed to lift fingerprints and a right-hand palm print on the pamphlet that matched to Oba. On top of all this evidence, police did find out that Oba Chandler never made any distress calls that night, the night he claimed that he had been stranded because of a gas line leak. So his alibi about contacting the Coast Guard or the Marine Patrol was completely made up. And an engineer actually confirmed that the incident that Oba tried to explain regarding the gas line leak couldn't happen the way he said it did. He explained that the gas fumes from the leak would have dissolved any adhesive on the duct tape, meaning that there was no way Oba Chandler could have fixed a gas line leak by himself on that boat and made it home. And on top of that, they found evidence that Oba Chandler had made a call to his wife in the middle of the night to tell him he would be running late for dinner because his boat had engine problems. And that's probably just him trying to solidify his alibi and telling his wife, sorry honey, I know it's 3 a.m., but I'm not going to be back for dinner because my boat has engine problems. And of course, when police confronted him with proof that his alibi made no sense, he just claimed that he couldn't remember what actually happened that night with his boat. All of the evidence was working against Oba Chandler right now, and honestly, it just looked like Joan, Michelle, and Christy Rogers were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. They had bumped into him while looking for the hotel, and he provided them with directions. He noticed the Ohio license plates and possibly connected with them by telling them that he actually grew up there, which he did. He grew up in Cincinnati, but maybe that made him more familiar to them. And it is 1989, and they're just so excited to be on this trip. They're going to Florida. It's their first holiday together, and this man is just kindly offering a sunset boat ride on the ocean on his boat, and they just accept. And unfortunately, that turned their first holiday into their last holiday. This being Florida, Oba Chandler was actually charged with 3 counts of kidnapping and first-degree murder and was sentenced to death on November 4th, 1994. He did try to appeal it multiple times, but 17 years later, on November 15th, 2011, Oba Chandler was executed by lethal injection. And although some of his children believe that this was a very unfair trial, and they also don't believe that their father could do something like that, nobody came to visit him throughout his entire death sentence. He was described as the loneliest man in the loneliest place, death row. And one of his daughters did actually say that he was a monster who got what he deserved. Oba did leave a written statement before his execution, which read, "You are killing an innocent man today." Which is just so infuriating. Like, honestly, splish splash, your opinion is trash. Like, you've been convicted for these murders. We know you've done them. If anything, you're definitely guilty of at least the rape. So the fact that he's trying to come across as this innocent man, it just drives me insane that on his last day, I don't know, like, wouldn't you just want to admit and get rid of the guilt? I don't know. Like, makes me so angry. But he did leave a written statement stating that he was innocent and that we were killing an innocent man that day. Like, regardless of how you feel about the death sentence, he's definitely not innocent. You know, that's the only thing he's not. Interestingly enough, a few years later, Oba Chandler was linked to another unsolved mystery. This was a murder that happened in 1990 in Coral Springs, Florida, and I'm going to read the victim's name off of my screen because it's a very unusual name, but she was a 20-year-old Ivelisse Berrios Begueris. I'm so sorry if I'm not saying that right. She had been raped and strangled on November 27th, 1990, and left naked with ligature marks on her wrists and legs. DNA recovered from that cold case was later matched to Oba Chandler, and this case is now considered closed. But because Oba had already served his death sentence, he couldn't be charged with anything else. To get back to the victims, Joan, Michelle, and Christy were all buried on June 13th, 1989, in their hometown. Over 300 family members and friends came to pay their respects. And honestly, it's just such a terrifying case, and it's also such a heartbreaking case to know that they were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, which happens quite a lot. But the fact that this was their first holiday, that they were allegedly taking this holiday to distance themselves from the recent assault of Michelle's uncle, is just heartbreaking that it led to such a cold, I mean, it was, again, this wasn't a murder, this was an execution. It's bad enough that you're gonna maybe potentially assault someone or murder someone, but to throw them in the water still alive, you've got to be absolutely messed up. But on a more positive note, I do think that the way they solved this case was absolutely genius. The fact that they put billboards to raise awareness, and that in no time someone actually recognized the handwriting, and that was the first use of billboards to help solve a case. And from that time on, they did start using billboards to report missing people because it's so effective. I think it's amazing that Joanne Steffi could have just recognized the handwriting and that she had kept the receipt. I try to think of it as, you know, the odds of going on your first holiday and bumping into a murderer is just hopefully slim to none, but it's heartbreaking. But at the same time, the odds of someone recognizing such a random handwriting on a billboard, going home and checking the handwritten receipt that you'd kept and handed in to police, like, what are the odds of someone looking at that billboard at the right time and recognizing the handwriting? I don't know. It's just like that section alone, like the murder part and, you know, the entire crime is just horrendous, but the way the case was solved is just honestly, it's one of my top 5 favorite cases. I think people like true crime for very different reasons, and I think I'm definitely more into the forensics aspect of it. I love finding out how crimes are solved and what led to finding, the culprit. But this case is absolutely up there in terms of like, what are the odds? Just like John List and this guy recreating this face from 2 pictures that are decades old, and someone watching TV that night and recognizing him. I'm just gonna stop talking about it, but I absolutely love this case for that reason alone. And if this is a case you didn't know about it, please comment down below. I feel like people really don't talk about this at all. I've only seen maybe one other video on YouTube mention it, aside from the obvious TV reports. But yeah, this is definitely a case I really wanted to share with you guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you have any other case ideas, or if you have any other cases you'd like me to talk about, please comment them down below. If you like true crime, please like and subscribe, because I'm going to do plenty more, and I occasionally sprinkle in some hamster content to lighten the mood. So if you're into all of that, I hope I'll see you next week in the next case, and have a lovely day.